The chandeliers of Ashford Manor blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off silk gowns and jewelled tiaras. Lady Lillian Ashford stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her heart hammering beneath the corset of her ivory wedding gown. In mere moments, she would become the Duchess of Ravensmere, bound to Duke Sebastian Harcourt, a man she barely knew but had been raised to marry. Yet as the orchestra swelled and guests turned expectantly toward the dais, the Duke stepped forward with another woman on his arm, his former lover. And in a voice that carried across the hushed assembly, he declared he would not marry a woman bred like livestock for alliance. The room erupted, Lillian's world shattered like crystal against marble. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Lady Lillian Ashford had been raised for a single purpose: to become the Duchess of Ravensmere. From the moment of her birth in the sprawling Ashford Manor, nestled among the rolling hills of Derbyshire, her life had been carefully orchestrated like a symphony composed before she could draw her first breath. Her mother, the formidable Countess Margaret Ashford, had supervised every detail of Lillian's education, from the precise angle of her curtsy to the memorization of peerage genealogies stretching back 3 centuries. At 22, Lillian possessed the kind of beauty that graced family portraits: luminous, pale skin, eyes the color of spring violets, and hair that cascaded in waves of burnished chestnut. Yet her most striking feature was not catalogued in any of the approving assessments made by society matrons. It was the keen intelligence that flickered behind her carefully composed expressions, the hunger for knowledge she'd learned to conceal beneath docile smiles. The Regency era in which she lived demanded much of women and offered little in return. Lillian had accepted this truth as she accepted the tight lacing of her corsets, as a necessary constraint of her existence. Her days unfolded in predictable patterns: morning walks through manicured gardens, afternoon lessons in watercolor and pianoforte, evening readings from approved texts, while her mother embroidered and commented on suitable matches. But Lillian harbored secret dreams. In the privacy of her chamber, she devoured her father's discarded newspapers, absorbing accounts of parliamentary debates and scientific discoveries. She taught herself rudimentary mathematics by candlelight, her mind electric with equations her governess had deemed unsuitable for feminine contemplation. She imagined a life beyond the gilt cage of her upbringing, perhaps a marriage to a kind man who might value her thoughts as well as her dowry. When Lord Ashford announced her betrothal to Duke Sebastian Harcourt, Lillian allowed herself to hope. The Duke was only 30, reportedly handsome, and holder of one of England's most distinguished titles. The Harcourt lineage could be traced to Norman conquest, their wealth derived from vast estates across 3 counties and shrewd investments in shipping ventures. An alliance between the Ashfords and Harcourts would cement both families' positions at the apex of British aristocracy. "You will want for nothing," her mother assured her, adjusting the seed pearls on Lillian's betrothal gown. "The Duke is a most eligible gentleman. His first wife's passing was tragic, of course, but 3 years is a respectable mourning period. You shall revive Ravensmere Castle's glory." Lillian met Duke Sebastian Harcourt on a grey October afternoon in the drawing-room of Ashford Manor. He entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to doors opening at his approach. Tall and athletically built, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes like polished obsidian, he possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that portraitists favoured. He bowed precisely, spoke correctly, and departed after the requisite 30 minutes. "He seems distinguished," Lillian offered when her parents demanded her impressions. "Distinguished?" Her father laughed. "My dear, he is magnificent. His estates generate £15,000 annually." 15,000, and that's merely from the agricultural rents. In the weeks preceding the wedding, Lillian saw the Duke only at carefully chaperoned events. He waltzed with her at balls, his hand firm at her waist, his conversation polite but distant. He never asked about her interests or opinions. When she tentatively mentioned an article about factory conditions she'd read, his expression cooled to something approaching disdain. "Such matters need not trouble your pretty head," he said, then steered the conversation to the weather. Lillian learned more about her future husband from whispered gossip than from his own lips. The servants spoke of his exacting standards, his volcanic temper when displeased, his expectation of absolute obedience. Her mother dismissed such talk as the inevitable grumblings of staff. Yet Lillian felt a growing unease, a tightening in her chest when she contemplated the vows she would soon speak. The Duke's first wife, she learned, had been a fragile beauty who died in childbirth along with their infant son. Some said the Duke had never recovered from the loss. Others whispered that the marriage had been troubled, that the Duchess had grown wan and silent in her final years. But such speculation was unseemly, and Lillian buried her concerns beneath layers of bridal preparations. Ashford Manor transformed into a hive of activity. Seamstresses swarmed Lillian's chambers, creating a trousseau of breathtaking extravagance. The wedding gown alone required 3 fittings, its ivory silk imported from France, its bodice embroidered with silver thread that caught light like captured starlight. 100 guests would attend the ceremony, followed by a ball that would establish Lillian's debut as a duchess. Yet at night, when the household slumbered, Lillian stood at her window overlooking the gardens where she'd played as a child. The autumn wind stripped leaves from ancient oaks, and she felt a kinship with their bare branches, everything superfluous falling away, leaving only what was essential and exposed. "I shall make the best of it," she whispered to the darkness. "Perhaps affection will grow with time. Perhaps he will see me as more than an ornamental acquisition." The night before her wedding, Lillian's younger sister Charlotte, a vivacious beauty of 19 with golden curls and a talent for attracting male attention, entered her chamber with unprecedented gentleness. "Are you frightened, Lily?" Charlotte asked, using the childhood nickname their mother had forbidden. "I am uncertain," Lillian admitted. "The Duke is not unkind, merely formal. Perhaps all aristocratic marriages begin thus." Charlotte's expression flickered with something Lillian couldn't identify. "I'm sure you'll be very happy," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and bright, November frost glittering on window panes like scattered diamonds. Lillian submitted to hours of preparation, her mother directing the process with military precision. The wedding gown transformed her into a porcelain figure, beautiful and fragile. Pearls woven through her hair caught the light. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized the stranger gazing back, a duchess in waiting, composed and perfect. As carriages arrived and guests filled the chapel at Ashford Manor, Lillian felt the weight of inevitability. The golden cage door was closing. She took her father's arm, felt him pat her hand with unusual tenderness, and prepared to walk toward her destiny. But destiny, she would soon learn, had other plans entirely. The chapel at Ashford Manor could accommodate 200 guests, but Lord Ashford had invited only the most distinguished members of the peerage, viscounts and earls, baronets and their bejeweled wives, all dressed in their finest silks and velvets. Candles blazed in silver candelabras, their flames reflecting off the ancient stained glass windows that had witnessed 4 generations of Ashford marriages. The air hung heavy with the scent of hothouse roses and lily of the valley, so cloying that Lillian felt light-headed as she stood in the vestibule. Through the partially open doors, she could see the Duke waiting at the altar, resplendent in midnight blue superfine with gold embroidery at the cuffs. The Archbishop himself had agreed to conduct the ceremony, a coup that had made her mother nearly delirious with triumph. Every detail had been choreographed to perfection. This was to be the social event of the season, the wedding that would be discussed in drawing rooms across England for months. The orchestra began the processional, and Lillian gripped her father's arm. Her bouquet of white roses trembled slightly in her other hand. Lord Ashford squeezed her fingers reassuringly, pride evident in his bearing as he prepared to deliver his daughter to one of England's premier dukes. They began the slow walk down the aisle. Lillian kept her eyes forward, her training holding her spine straight despite the tremor in her limbs. Curious faces turned to observe her progress, assessing, judging, approving. She was the picture of bridal perfection, the culmination of years of careful cultivation. But as they reached the midpoint of the chapel, Lillian noticed a disturbance near the altar. The Duke had turned away from the Archbishop, his attention fixed on something in the side pews. A murmur rippled through the assembled guests, starting soft but building like distant thunder. Then Lillian saw her. A woman had risen from her seat in the third row, a striking figure in a gown of deep crimson silk that seemed almost scandalous against the pastel propriety surrounding her. She was perhaps 30, with raven hair piled high and skin like cream. But it was her expression that arrested Lillian, a mixture of triumph and challenge, her dark eyes locked on the Duke with unmistakable intimacy. The Duke's face underwent a transformation. The mask of aristocratic composure cracked, revealing something raw and hungry beneath. He stepped away from the altar, ignoring the Archbishop's stammered confusion, and extended his hand toward the woman in red. "Lady Vivian," the Duke said, his voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "You came." Lady Vivian Blackwood, for Lillian recognized her now from society gossip, the widow whose scandalous affair with the Duke had consumed the Tun's attention 2 years prior, moved forward with predatory grace. She ascended the altar steps, her crimson skirts rustling like whispered secrets. "Did you truly think I could stay away, Sebastian?" Lady Vivian's voice was rich and confident, pitched to carry. "When I heard you planned to marry this girl," her gaze flicked dismissively over Lillian, "I knew I had to intervene. You cannot seriously intend to bind yourself to someone so utterly unsuited to your needs." Lord Ashford's grip on Lillian's arm tightened painfully. Around them the chapel erupted in shocked whispers. Ladies hid scandalized smiles behind their fans. Gentlemen leaned forward, avid for drama. The Archbishop looked between the Duke and the intruder, clearly at a loss for how to proceed. "Your Grace," Lillian's father said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury, "this is highly irregular. I must insist." "Insist?" The Duke's laugh was bitter and cold. He finally looked at Lillian, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her blood freeze. Not regret, not even cruelty, simply indifference, as if she were a piece of furniture whose placement had become inconvenient. "My Lord Ashford, let us speak plainly before this assembly. I cannot proceed with this marriage." The words fell like executioner's axe strokes. Lillian felt her father stiffen beside her, heard her mother's sharp intake of breath from the front pew. The guests' whispers crescendoed into audible gasps and exclamations. "We had an arrangement," Lord Ashford managed, his face purpling. "Contracts were signed. The settlements will be honored financially," the Duke interrupted, his tone suggesting he was discussing the sale of livestock rather than the dissolution of a betrothal before 200 witnesses. "But I will not marry your daughter. I will not shackle myself to a woman bred like a prized heifer for alliance, trained to simper and obey, with no more substance than a porcelain doll. I require a wife with passion, intelligence, spirit, qualities your insipid daughter could never possess." Each word was a lash. Lillian stood frozen, still holding her ridiculous bouquet, still wearing her veil and her pearls, still the picture of bridal innocence, except now she was the picture of bridal abandonment. The chapel seemed to tilt around her. Faces swam in her vision, all those aristocratic countenances now alight with malicious delight at witnessing her destruction. "Sebastian has always needed someone who could match his intensity," Lady Vivian said, sliding her arm through the Duke's with possessive ease. "Not some timid child playing at being a duchess. He and I understand each other. We share appetites that require a more sophisticated palate." The Duke looked down at Lady Vivian with unmistakable desire, his hand covering hers. Then he turned to address the assembled guests, his voice ringing with authority. "I apologize for the disruption to your afternoon. However, I believe it's far more honorable to speak truth now than to proceed with a union founded on obligation rather than genuine regard. Lady Lillian is a perfectly adequate young woman, I'm sure, but adequacy is insufficient for a man of my standing. She will recover from this disappointment and no doubt find a more suitable match among the lesser gentry." Lesser gentry. The words hung in the air like poison. Lillian heard her mother sob, a sound of such pure anguish that it penetrated her shock. Her father stood rigid, humiliation etched into every line of his face. And Charlotte. Lillian's gaze found her sister in the second pew, but instead of sympathy, she saw something else in Charlotte's expression. A flash of satisfaction, quickly concealed. A triumphant glitter in eyes that had always been competitive. "Come, Vivian," the Duke said, offering his arm. "We've said what needed saying." And they walked. Down the aisle of the chapel, past 200 stunned guests, past Lillian still standing in her wedding gown, like a ghost of celebrations that would never be. Lady Vivian's crimson dress seemed to leave a trail of fire in its wake. The Duke never looked back. The moment they exited, pandemonium erupted. Guests rose from their pews, voices rising in excited speculation and cruel commentary. Lillian heard snatches of conversation. Always knew the match was too ambitious. Poor child, utterly ruined. Lady Vivian always did have claws in him. What a scandal, absolutely delicious. And felt something inside her shatter. Her father's arm was the only thing keeping her upright. Her mother had collapsed, requiring assistance from her lady's maid. The Archbishop cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to conclude the ceremony officially or simply flee. "Lillian," her father's voice was hollow. We should." But Lillian couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the roaring in her ears and the terrible, crushing weight of humiliation pressing down on her chest. She had been rejected, publicly, brutally, before everyone who mattered in her social sphere. The Duke had called her insipid, a porcelain doll, a prized heifer. He had preferred a scandalous widow to her. He had destroyed her in the most comprehensive way imaginable. The guests were leaving now, streaming past with barely concealed glee, already composing the letters they would write to distant relations describing the disaster. Some offered pitying glances, most simply stared, committing every detail of her destruction to memory for future recounting. Lillian dropped her bouquet, white roses scattered across the chapel floor like fallen petals from a funeral wreath. And as her father finally guided her from the altar, past the empty pews and the guttering candles, she felt the golden cage of her existence collapse entirely. But instead of freedom, she found only ruins. 3 days after the catastrophe at Ashford Manor, Lillian sat in the morning room while rain streaked the window panes, staring at nothing. She wore a grey morning dress that seemed to match her complexion, pale, lifeless, utterly devoid of colour. Her mother had taken to her bed, prostrate with mortification. Her father locked himself in his study, writing furious letters to solicitors about breach of contract, and the servants whispered, their pitying glances almost worse than the humiliation itself. The scandal had spread like wildfire through the ton. By the following morning, every breakfast table in fashionable London buzzed with accounts of the Duke's rejection. Lillian received 3 letters breaking off invitations to events she'd been expected to attend as the Duchess of Ravensmere. The cuts were swift and merciless. Society had already decided her fate. "You cannot hide forever," Charlotte said, entering the morning room with her usual graceful confidence. Her blonde curls were perfectly arranged, her muslin gown pristine. She looked like everything Lillian was not, vibrant, untroubled, ascending while her sister sank. "I'm not hiding," Lillian replied flatly. "I'm simply existing. People are saying you must have done something to drive the Duke away, that you were cold or stupid or—" Charlotte's eyes glittered. "Perhaps not as innocent as you appeared." The cruelty was breathtaking. Lillian finally looked at her sister and saw the truth she'd been too naive to recognize before. Charlotte was jealous. had always been jealous. And now, with Lillian's prospects destroyed, Charlotte could shine without competition. "Why do you hate me?" Lillian asked quietly. "Hate you?" Charlotte laughed, the sound brittle. "Don't be melodramatic. I simply think you need to face reality. No one will marry you now. You're ruined. Mother says we'll have to retire to the country for at least a year, maybe longer. You've become an embarrassment to the family." Before Lillian could respond, the butler entered with a silver salver bearing a single letter. "For Lady Lillian," he intoned, "delivered by special messenger." Charlotte snatched the letter before Lillian could reach for it, examining the seal. "It's from London, from Lady Agatha Pemberton." She frowned. "Father's aunt. I thought she was estranged from the family." Lady Agatha Pemberton was indeed Lord Ashford's paternal aunt, a woman of 70 who had scandalized her family 3 decades earlier by refusing to remarry after her husband's death, choosing instead to establish an independent household in Bloomsbury and associate with artists, writers and reformers. Lillian had met her only twice, both times briefly, but remembered a sharp-eyed woman with an unnerving habit of seeing through social pretensions. Lillian retrieved the letter from Charlotte's reluctant grip and broke the seal. The handwriting was firm and decisive. "My dear Lillian, I have heard of your recent troubles and find myself unsurprised. The Duke of Ravensmere is a pompous ass who mistakes arrogance for substance. You are well rid of him, though I imagine you cannot see that through your present distress. I write to offer you sanctuary. Come to London, to my house in Bloomsbury Square. Your parents will object, they always do, but I believe you require perspective that cannot be found within the suffocating confines of your current situation. I promise you intellectual stimulation, honest conversation, and the company of people who value minds over pedigrees. The choice is yours, but I urge swift decision. Wallowing in humiliation serves no one, least of all yourself. Your affectionate great-aunt, Lady Agatha Pemberton." "What does she want?" Charlotte demanded. "She's invited me to stay with her in London." "London?" Charlotte's voice rose. "You cannot be serious. Aunt Agatha is practically a bluestocking. She associates with radicals and tradespeople. Mother would never allow it." But something stirred in Lillian's chest, something that felt remarkably like hope. She stood, the letter clutched in her hand, and walked from the morning room without another word to her sister. She found her father in his study, surrounded by legal documents, and wearing the expression of a general whose army had been routed. "Father," Lillian said from the doorway, "I wish to accept Lady Agatha's invitation to visit her in London." Lord Ashford looked up, surprise evident in his features. "Agatha wrote to you. That meddling woman has appalling timing." He sighed heavily. "Perhaps it's not the worst idea. You cannot remain here. The whispers are intolerable. And your mother?" He gestured helplessly toward the ceiling. "She cannot bear to look at you without weeping. Yes, go to London. Stay with Agatha until the scandal dies down. Perhaps in a year or two we can find you a quiet match with some widower in need of a competent manager for his household." The casual dismissal of her prospects stung, but Lillian held her composure. "I'll arrange for departure tomorrow." Within 24 hours, Lillian found herself in a well-appointed carriage travelling toward London, accompanied only by her maid Grace, a sensible woman of 30 who had served the family for a decade. As Ashford Manor receded behind them, Lillian felt chains loosening from her chest. Lady Agatha's townhouse in Bloomsbury proved nothing like the grand mansions of Mayfair. It was a modest but elegant Georgian building with cheerful yellow curtains and window boxes overflowing with late autumn blooms. The butler who admitted them had kind eyes and called Lillian Miss Lillian rather than Lady Lillian, which felt strangely liberating. Lady Agatha herself materialized in the entrance hall, a tall, spare woman dressed in deep purple, her silver hair swept into a simple chignon. She assessed Lillian with eyes that missed nothing, then nodded once. "You look like hell," she announced. "Good. That means you're feeling the appropriate emotions, rather than burying them under false composure. Come, we'll have tea and you'll tell me everything." Over the next hour, in Lady Agatha's cosy sitting room filled with books and questionable modern art, Lillian found herself recounting the entire nightmare. Lady Agatha listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "The Duke did you a profound favour," Lady Agatha said when Lillian finished. "I know you cannot see it yet, but marriages like the one you were entering destroy women. They reduce you to decorative objects, valued only for bloodlines and childbearing capacity. Sebastian Harcourt is a narcissist who requires constant validation. Lady Vivienne is welcome to that particular burden." "But I'm ruined," Lillian whispered. "No one will marry me now. I've brought shame on my family." "Ruined?" Lady Agatha's laugh was sharp. "My dear child, you've been liberated. Society's opinion is worth precisely nothing. What matters is what you do with this unexpected freedom." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Tell me, Lillian, if you could choose any life free from expectations, what would you want?" No one had ever asked Lillian that question. She sat in stunned silence, her mind reaching toward possibilities she'd never dared articulate. I enjoy learning," she said hesitantly. "Mathematics especially, and reading about reform movements, about science and philosophy. I've always wondered what it would be like to engage with ideas, not just observe them from a distance." Lady Agatha smiled triumphantly. "Then that's precisely what we'll do. Tomorrow evening I'm hosting a salon. Writers, philosophers, a prominent botanist, and a rather brilliant physician newly returned from studying in Edinburgh. You'll attend, you'll listen, and perhaps you'll even speak. It's time you discovered that intelligence is far more valuable than aristocratic approval." That evening, as Lillian prepared for bed in the comfortable guest chamber Lady Agatha had provided, she felt something she hadn't experienced in days: curiosity about tomorrow. Grace helped her into her nightdress, chattering about the interesting bookshops she'd spotted during their arrival. "If I may say so, my lady," Grace ventured, "you seem lighter here, less burdened." Lillian considered this. "Perhaps I am, or perhaps I'm simply too stunned by everything to carry the weight properly." The following evening, Lady Agatha's salon proved revelatory. 30 guests crowded the drawing room, men and women, young and old, dressed in everything from fashionable evening wear to distinctly bohemian attire. A poet read verses about social justice. A lady novelist discussed her forthcoming work. Arguments erupted and resolved with passionate intensity. And then Lillian met Dr. Gabriel Thornfield. He was speaking with Lady Agatha near the fireplace when Lillian entered. A tall man of perhaps 35, with unruly dark brown hair, intelligent grey eyes, and the kind of face that suggested both kindness and determination. He wore his evening clothes with casual comfort rather than aristocratic precision, and when he laughed at something Lady Agatha said, the sound was genuine and warm. "Lillian," Lady Agatha called, beckoning her over. "Come meet Dr. Thornfield." "Gabriel, this is my great-niece, Lady Lillian Ashford." Dr. Thornfield bowed, but his greeting was refreshingly informal. "Lady Lillian, your aunt tells me you have an interest in mathematics." Lillian hesitated, years of training warning her not to appear too intellectual, but Dr. Thornfield's expression held only genuine interest, no mockery. "Yes, I find it fascinating. The precision, the way numbers reveal truth. Have you studied calculus?" he asked, and suddenly they were deep in conversation about Newton and Leibniz, about mathematical proofs and their applications in medicine. Dr. Thornfield spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinions, challenging her reasoning, listening when she responded. "You have a remarkably sharp mind," he said after 20 minutes of animated discussion. "Have you considered formal study?" "Women cannot attend university," Lillian replied, unable to hide her bitterness. "Not officially," Dr. Thornfield agreed, "but there are private lectures, tutors, societies. If you're truly interested, I could make introductions. Edinburgh was progressive. I studied alongside women whose intellects far surpassed most of their male peers." Lady Agatha watched their exchange with satisfaction. As the evening progressed, Lillian found herself drawn repeatedly into conversation with Dr. Thornfield. He told her about his work establishing a free clinic in the East End, his commitment to serving patients regardless of their ability to pay. His passion for medicine as a means of social reform resonated with ideals she'd barely known she possessed. When he departed near midnight, he bowed over her hand with unexpected warmth. "I hope we'll meet again, Lady Lillian. I've rarely enjoyed a conversation so stimulating." After the guests left, Lady Agatha poured them both a small glass of sherry, scandalously improper, but Lillian was learning that Lady Agatha's household operated by different rules. "Dr. Thornfield is a good man," Lady Agatha remarked. "Brilliant physician, comes from modest gentry. His father was a country vicar. He chose medicine over the church and has dedicated himself to serving the poor. Society considers him peculiar for refusing more lucrative positions with aristocratic families." "He spoke to me as if my thoughts mattered," Lillian said wonderingly. "That's because they do," Lady Agatha replied. "The world beyond your parents' drawing room operates quite differently, my dear. Here, you'll be valued for your mind and character, not your pedigree or your ability to make an advantageous match." That night, Lillian lay awake, contemplating her future. For the first time since the Duke's rejection, she felt something beyond humiliation and despair. She felt possibility. 6 weeks in Lady Agatha's household transformed Lillian in ways she could never have anticipated. Each evening brought new salons, new ideas, new people who challenged her understanding of the world. She began formal mathematics lessons with a retired Cambridge professor Lady Agatha knew. She attended lectures on political economy, albeit disguised in the audience as Mrs. Brown to avoid scandal. She read voraciously, texts her mother would have burned as dangerously radical. And she saw Dr. Gabriel Thornfield with increasing frequency. He became a regular at Lady Agatha's salons and soon began inviting Lillian to visit his clinic, properly chaperoned by Lady Agatha, to see his work firsthand. In the cramped, modest rooms where he treated dock workers and seamstresses, Lillian witnessed compassion in action. Gabriel, for she'd begun thinking of him by his Christian name, though she'd never spoken it aloud, moved among his patients with gentle authority, explaining treatments, listening to concerns, treating each person with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. "You'd make an excellent physician yourself," he told her one December afternoon as they walked through the nearby market, Lady Agatha trailing at a discreet distance. "Your analytical mind, your capacity for observation, these are precisely the qualities medicine requires." "Women cannot be physicians," Lillian replied, though the longing in her voice betrayed her wish that this were untrue. "Not yet," Gabriel said. "But the world is changing, Lillian, more slowly than it should, but changing nonetheless. Women like you, intelligent, determined, you'll be the ones who force those changes." He was the first man who'd ever expressed faith in her capabilities beyond ornamental value. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced, not as Lady Lillian Ashford of the distinguished Derbyshire Ashfords, but simply as Lillian, a woman whose thoughts and observations held intrinsic worth. By January, Lillian had begun to heal from the humiliation of her abandoned wedding. She still felt the sting when she thought of the Duke's words, the public rejection, but the pain had dulled to an ache rather than an open wound. She began to understand what Lady Agatha meant about liberation. Without the constraints of impending marriage, without the endless supervision and expectations, she was discovering who she might become when given freedom to choose. Then came the invitation. It arrived on a February morning when frost still glazed the windows of Lady Agatha's townhouse. The envelope bore the royal seal, heavy with significance. Lady Agatha read it first, then looked at Lillian with raised eyebrows. "His Majesty King George IV is hosting a ball at Carlton House to celebrate the opening of the new parliamentary session. You've been invited." She paused meaningfully. as have the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere. Lillian's stomach clenched. Duchess? He married Lady Vivian 3 weeks ago, Lady Agatha said gently. I hadn't mentioned it because I saw no need to cause you unnecessary pain, but apparently they'll be attending this ball. Then I cannot possibly go, Lillian said immediately. To face them again, to endure the whispers and stares. On the contrary, Lady Agatha interrupted, her voice sharp with determination. You must go. You will go. Lillian, you've spent these past weeks reclaiming yourself, discovering your strength and intelligence. Will you allow that odious man and his equally odious wife to cow you into hiding? Will you give society the satisfaction of seeing you cower? I don't have anything to prove to them. No, but you have something to prove to yourself. Lady Agatha leaned forward intensely. Go to that ball. Hold your head high. Show everyone, show yourself, that Lady Lillian Ashford is far more than the woman the Duke rejected. You are brilliant, you are capable, and you deserve to take up space in the world without apology. Dr. Gabriel Thornfield, when consulted that evening, agreed with Lady Agatha. It will be difficult, he acknowledged, but running from difficulty grants it power over you. Attend the ball. I'll be there. The King's physician is an old mentor of mine and secured me an invitation. If you need an ally, you'll have one. Thus Lillian found herself 3 weeks later dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that Lady Agatha insisted brought out her eyes, standing before the mirror in her chamber while Grace arranged her hair. The woman, reflected back, bore little resemblance to the naive bride of 4 months earlier. This Lillian had shadows beneath her eyes from late nights reading philosophy, a sharper set to her jaw, a light in her expression that spoke of intellectual awakening rather than docile obedience. Carlton House blazed with light, its grand rooms filled with the cream of British society. As Lillian entered on Lady Agatha's arm, she felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The whispers started immediately. That's the girl the Duke rejected, extraordinary nerve showing her face. I heard she's been living quite bohemian in Bloomsbury. But Lillian kept her spine straight and her expression composed. Then she saw them. The Duke and his new Duchess stood near the centre of the ballroom, holding court like monarchs. Lady Vivian wore crimson again, clearly her signature colour, dripping with rubies that caught the candlelight. The Duke looked precisely as Lillian remembered. Handsome, arrogant, utterly assured of his own magnificence. When his gaze found Lillian across the room, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance that she dared appear. Steady, Lady Agatha murmured. Remember, he's the one who should feel shame, not you. Dr. Gabriel Thornfield materialized at Lillian's other side, impeccable in his evening clothes. Lady Lillian, he said warmly, you look formidable. Shall we scandalize the Assembly by discussing your recent insights into epidemiological patterns? His easy manner steadied her. They moved through the crowd, Gabriel introducing her to colleagues and acquaintances as if she were a respected intellectual rather than a social pariah. Some received her coolly, but others, particularly the more progressive or unconventional guests, engaged her in genuine conversation. Then the Duke approached. He cut through the crowd with his new Duchess on his arm, clearly intent on confrontation. Lady Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade, her eyes assessing Lillian's gown and appearance with obvious intent to find fault. Lady Lillian, the Duke said, his tone dripping with false courtesy. How unexpected to see you here. I'd heard you'd retired from society. Merely relocated to more interesting circles, Lillian replied, pleased that her voice emerged steady. Your Grace, Duchess, I hope married life suits you both. Lady Vivian's laugh was brittle. Oh, it's quite marvellous. Sebastian is everything I knew he would be. Passionate, demanding, utterly consuming. Not everyone can handle such intensity, of course. Some women are simply too tepid. The insult landed as intended, but Lillian found herself less wounded than she'd expected. These people, their opinions, seemed suddenly small and rather pathetic. "I'm sure you're ideally matched," Lillian said. "After all, you both possess such remarkable self-regard. It must be delightful to have found someone who shares your primary interest, yourselves." The Duke's expression darkened. Before he could respond, Dr. Thornfield smoothly intervened. "Your Grace, I don't believe we've been introduced. Dr. Gabriel Thornfield. I've been reading about your estates with interest. I understand you've invested in several industrial ventures." The Duke preened at the attention, launching into a pompous description of his various financial interests. Lady Vivian watched Gabriel with calculating interest, clearly assessing his worth and finding him wanting, a mere physician, regardless of his education or character. "And you, Lady Lillian," Lady Vivian said, her tone falsely sweet. "What have you been occupying yourself with during your exile?" "Study, primarily," Lillian replied. "Mathematics, philosophy, political economy. I've found intellectual pursuits far more rewarding than I ever imagined. Dr. Thornfield has been kind enough to facilitate my education." "How quaint," the Duchess drawled, playing at being a blue stocking. "I suppose one must find some way to pass the time when matrimonial prospects have evaporated." "Better a blue stocking than a scarlet woman," Lady Agatha interjected tartly, her gaze pointedly on Lady Vivian's crimson gown. "At least intelligence improves with cultivation, whereas notoriety merely grows tawdry." The Duchess's face flushed with anger, but before she could retort, a stirring near the ballroom entrance caught everyone's attention. The crowd parted, guests bowing and curtsying deeply. King George IV entered, resplendent in medals and sash, his expression jovial, despite his infamous health troubles. He surveyed the assembled company with evident satisfaction, then his gaze landed on Lillian. To her absolute shock, the king's expression brightened with recognition. "Lady Lillian Ashford," he called out, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "My dear, I'm delighted you accepted our invitation." Lillian sank into a deep curtsy, her mind racing. How did the king know her name? They'd never been introduced. The king approached with surprising speed for a man of his bulk and ailments. "Rise, rise," he said warmly. "Lady Agatha has been bending my ear about you for weeks. Says you've a mind as sharp as any scholar at Cambridge. High praise from a woman who doesn't suffer fools." Lady Agatha curtsied beside Lillian, looking insufferably smug. "Your Majesty is too kind. I merely spoke truth. Tell me," the king continued, addressing Lillian directly, while the entire ballroom strained to hear, "is it true you've been studying calculus? Always wished I'd had more aptitude for mathematics myself. Fascinating field, absolutely crucial for the sciences." Yes, Your Majesty," Lillian managed. "Professor Whitmore has been instructing me. It's extraordinarily complex but deeply rewarding." The king beamed. "Excellent, excellent. We need more educated women in this country. Intelligence shouldn't be the sole province of stuffy men in universities, eh?" He glanced around at the assembled aristocrats, many of whom looked scandalized by this progressive sentiment. His gaze landed on the Duke and Duchess, and his expression cooled slightly. "Ravensmere, Duchess, I trust you're well?" "Exceedingly, Your Majesty," the Duke said, bowing. The king's smile was thin. "Glad to hear it. Though I must say, Ravensmere, I found your behavior last autumn rather disappointing. Breaking an engagement so publicly, poor form, regardless of one's personal feelings." The Duke paled. A public reprimand from the king was a devastating social blow. "Your Majesty, circumstances—" Yes, circumstances," the king interrupted. "Well, Lady Lillian seems to have emerged quite well despite your circumstances." He turned back to Lillian with genuine warmth. "My dear, would you do me the honor of the next dance? I don't move as gracefully as I once did, but I can still manage a waltz without treading on too many toes." The ballroom erupted in excited whispers. The king asking a supposedly ruined woman to dance. Lillian felt dizzy with the impossibility of the moment, but she curtsied again. "The honor would be entirely mine, Your Majesty." As the orchestra struck up a waltz, the king led Lillian onto the floor. Couples cleared a space. all eyes fixed on the unprecedented sight of His Majesty personally selecting Lady Lillian Ashford, the woman the Duke had rejected, for the most prominent dance of the evening. "Don't look so terrified," the King said kindly as they began the steps. "I won't drop you, and you're doing splendidly. Agatha was right about you. You've got backbone. Takes courage to face down the sort of public humiliation you endured." "Your Majesty is generous," Lillian whispered. "Nonsense. I'm old, fat, and tired of watching pompous aristocrats abuse those with less power. Ravensmere needed taking down several pegs. His father was a decent man, but the current Duke is an insufferable prig." The King paused, then added more quietly, "You're better off without him, you know. He would have made you miserable. Men like that, they want ornaments, not partners. You deserve far better." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Your Majesty." When the waltz concluded, the King bowed over her hand with genuine courtesy, then addressed the room at large. "Lady Lillian is under our particular favor. Anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will answer to us personally. Understood?" The assembled nobility murmured hasty agreement. The King departed shortly after, having achieved his purpose, but the effect of his intervention rippled through the ballroom like a stone cast in still water. Suddenly everyone wanted to speak with Lillian, to be seen in her company, to curry favor with the woman the King had honored. The Duke and Duchess slipped away early, their expressions thunderous. Lady Agatha looked ready to burst with triumph. And Dr. Gabriel Thornfield claimed Lillian for the next dance, his grey eyes warm with admiration. "You were magnificent," he said as they waltzed. "Absolutely magnificent." Lillian felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt remarkably like freedom taking wing. The morning after the Carlton House ball, Lillian woke to find herself famous. Not infamous, as she'd been following the Duke's rejection, but genuinely celebrated. The King's public favour had transformed her from cautionary tale to fascinating figure overnight. Lady Agatha's townhouse received no fewer than 30 calling cards before noon. Invitations flooded in, and even a poet composed verses about the Lady of Resilience that appeared in the Morning Chronicle. "Society is nothing if not fickle," Lady Agatha observed over breakfast, sorting through the pile of correspondence. 4 months ago they crucified you. Today you're their darling because the King smiled in your direction. Remember this lesson, Lillian. Other people's opinions are weather patterns, constantly shifting and utterly unreliable. Never build your house upon them. But amid the social triumph, Lillian found her thoughts returning persistently to Dr. Gabriel Thornfield. The way he'd stood beside her at the ball, steady and supportive. The warmth in his eyes when he'd called her magnificent. The months of genuine friendship and intellectual companionship they'd shared. She was, she realized with dawning wonder, falling in love with him. Not the desperate, uncertain attachment she'd felt toward the Duke, that had been obligation wrapped in romantic delusion. This was different. Gabriel saw her, truly saw her, and valued precisely the qualities she'd been taught to hide. With him, she felt both cherished and challenged, supported and respected. The question was whether he felt similarly. 3 days after the ball, Gabriel called at Bloomsbury Square during Lady Agatha's afternoon at-home hours. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, his usual easy confidence replaced by something more hesitant. "Lady Lillian," he said after they'd exchanged pleasantries and found a relatively private corner of Lady Agatha's drawing room, "I wonder if I might speak with you about a matter of some importance." "Of course," Lillian replied, her heart suddenly racing. Gabriel took a breath. "I've been offered a position, a very good position actually, establishing a teaching hospital in Edinburgh with a focus on training physicians to serve working-class communities. It's everything I've dreamed of professionally." He paused, his grey eyes searching hers. "But it would require leaving London. Leaving, well, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Lillian managed, though disappointment crashed through her. Of course he would leave. Why would a brilliant physician remain in London for her? "It is wonderful," Gabriel agreed, but I find myself remarkably reluctant to accept. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Lillian, these past months have been the happiest of my life, and it's entirely because of you. Your brilliance, your courage, your extraordinary mind. I've never met anyone remotely like you. I know I have little to offer compared to your social status. I'm the son of a country vicar. I work with the poor. My prospects are modest at best. But that is, if you could possibly— Yes, Lillian interrupted. Gabriel blinked. I haven't actually asked the question yet. Then ask it, Lillian said, smiling through sudden tears. Quickly, before I burst. Gabriel laughed, the sound joyful and relieved. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles with exquisite tenderness. Lady Lillian Ashford, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Would you come to Edinburgh with me, not as an ornament or a social acquisition, but as a true partner? I promise you intellectual companionship, genuine respect, and every opportunity to develop your considerable talents. And, he added more softly, I promise you love, for whatever that's worth from a physician of modest means. It's worth everything, Lillian whispered. Yes, Gabriel. Yes, absolutely yes. He kissed her hand, his eyes bright with emotion. I should speak to your father, I suppose. Request his permission properly. He'll agree, Lillian said. He's desperate to see me respectably settled, and a physician, even one with modest prospects, is far better than the spinster fate he was envisioning. Lady Agatha, who had been observing from across the room with poorly concealed satisfaction, raised her teacup in a small salute. Lillian caught her eye and smiled, gratitude flooding through her. Without her great-aunt's intervention, none of this would have been possible. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Lord and Lady Ashford travelled to London to meet Dr. Thornfield, and while Lillian's mother initially seemed disappointed that her daughter hadn't secured a duke despite everything, she was ultimately mollified by Gabriel's evident intelligence and respectability. Her father, pragmatically assessing the situation, recognized that Gabriel represented stability and genuine affection, qualities that mattered more than a lofty title. The settlement negotiations were straightforward. Gabriel refused to accept more than a modest dowry, much to Lord Ashford's surprise. I'm marrying your daughter for her mind and character, not her fortune, Gabriel said firmly. We'll manage quite comfortably on my salary and whatever she brings. Charlotte attended the engagement dinner at Lady Agatha's townhouse, her expression a complicated mixture of envy and reluctant admiration. She'd lost weight since autumn, Lillian noticed, and seemed diminished somehow, as if her triumph at Lillian's downfall had curdled into something less satisfying than anticipated. He seems quite devoted to you, Charlotte said grudgingly during a private moment. The doctor. He is, Lillian replied gently, and I to him. I thought I'd be glad when the Duke rejected you, Charlotte admitted suddenly, her voice small. I thought it meant I could finally be the important one, the beautiful daughter everyone noticed. But it's been dreadful, actually. Mother's been impossible, father's been furious, and society treats our family like we're contaminated. Your scandal became everyone's scandal. I'm sorry, Lillian said, and meant it. I never wanted any of this. I know. Charlotte twisted her hands together. I was horrid to you, Lily. I was jealous and cruel, and I'm sorry, truly. The use of her childhood nickname, the genuine contrition in Charlotte's voice, it cracked something in Lillian's chest. She embraced her sister, feeling Charlotte cling to her with uncharacteristic vulnerability. We'll both survive this, Lillian whispered, and perhaps we'll both be better for it. One piece of business remained. Lillian insisted on making a final visit to Ashford Manor before her departure for Edinburgh. She needed to see her childhood home one last time to close that chapter of her life properly. The visit coincided quite deliberately with a house party the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere were hosting at Ravensmere Castle, located only 15 miles from Ashford Manor. Lillian had no intention of attending, but news of her engagement to Dr. Thornfield had naturally reached the Duke's ears, and he sent a stiffly worded note requesting a private audience. Against Gabriel's advice, but with Lady Agatha's approval, Lilian agreed to meet him in neutral territory, the library at Ashford Manor, with her father present in an adjoining room. The Duke arrived precisely on time, looking somewhat less assured than Lilian remembered. He bowed formally, and she curtsied with equal formality. They sat in wing chairs before the fire, the silence initially awkward. "I understand congratulations are in order," the Duke said finally. "Your engagement to Dr. Thornfield." "Thank you," Lilian replied. "We're very happy." The Duke shifted uncomfortably. That is, I feel I should—" He stopped, frustrated. "Lady Lilian, I behaved abominably toward you. I know this. I've known it, if I'm honest, since the morning after the wedding that wasn't." Lilian waited, saying nothing. "The truth is," the Duke continued, his voice strained, "I panicked. The night before the ceremony I saw Vivian at a card party. She'd avoided me for 2 years, and suddenly there she was, all passion and fire, reminding me of everything I'd felt for her. I convinced myself I was making a terrible mistake marrying you, that I'd be shackling myself to someone dull." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I was catastrophically wrong." "You were," Lilian agreed quietly. "Vivienne is—" The Duke laughed bitterly. "Exhausting, demanding. Every day is either a theatrical passion or a dramatic crisis. There's no peace, no genuine companionship, just constant performance." He leaned forward intently. "Whereas you, I see now what I was too blind to recognize then. You're extraordinary, Lady Lilian, intelligent, resilient, principled. Dr. Thornfield is a fortunate man." "He is," Lilian said, allowing herself a small smile. "As am I fortunate in him." The Duke sagged back in his chair. "I don't expect forgiveness. I humiliated you publicly, and I caused you profound suffering. But I wanted you to know that I recognize my error, and that I hope you'll find happiness in Scotland." Lilian studied him, this man who had once represented her entire future, who had destroyed her with his rejection. She felt nothing, no residual love, no lasting bitterness, just a kind of distant pity for someone trapped in a prison of his own creation. "I have found happiness," she said, "and your grace. I hope you eventually find some measure of peace yourself. But I think we both know the marriage you chose was the right one. For both of us, we would have made each other miserable." The Duke nodded slowly. "Yes, I think you're right." He stood, preparing to depart. "Thank you for seeing me. And Lady Lilian, I truly am sorry." After he left, Lilian sat alone in the library for a long while, watching the fire crackle and feeling the weight of the past 4 months settle into something she could finally carry without pain. She'd been broken, she'd been humiliated, but she'd also been freed, and from those ruins, she'd built something entirely her own. The golden cage had shattered, and in its place she'd chosen wings. 8 months after her arrival in Edinburgh, Lilian stood at the window of the comfortable townhouse she shared with Gabriel, watching spring rain streak the glass and feeling contentment settle into her bones like warmth after cold. The city sprawled below, grey stone buildings, church spires, the castle looming majestically on its volcanic rock, and she'd come to love its intellectual vibrancy, its rough beauty so different from the manicured elegance of the English countryside. The teaching hospital Gabriel had established was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections. Located in Edinburgh's new town, it served working-class patients while simultaneously training a new generation of physicians in progressive techniques. Gabriel worked grueling hours, but he approached his labor with such evident purpose and satisfaction that Lilian couldn't begrudge the time, and she was hardly idle herself. Through Gabriel's connections and her own persistent determination, Lilian had secured permission to audit lectures at the University of Edinburgh's medical school, the first woman ever granted such access. She sat in the back row, took meticulous notes, and ignored the occasional hostile stares from male students who resented her presence. Her mathematical aptitude proved invaluable in understanding anatomy and physiology, and several professors had begun consulting her privately on research questions. More significantly, Lillian had begun writing. Her first article, a mathematical analysis of disease transmission patterns in urban populations, had been published in a progressive medical journal under the androgynous byline L.A. Thornfield. The piece generated considerable discussion, and she'd since submitted 2 additional papers, both accepted for publication. "You're changing the world," Gabriel told her often, his grey eyes warm with pride. "One equation, one lecture, one published paper at a time." Their marriage had exceeded Lillian's every hope. Gabriel treated her as an intellectual equal and cherished partner, consulting her on difficult cases, debating philosophical questions late into the night, supporting her ambitions without constraint. And the physical aspects of their union, which Lillian had approached with trepidation given her complete ignorance, proved tender, passionate, and deeply connecting. "I never imagined marriage could be like this," she confessed one morning as they breakfasted together in their sunny kitchen. "Partnership, genuine partnership. Because you'd only seen the aristocratic model," Gabriel replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Where women are property and men are dictators. We're building something different, something better." That afternoon, Lillian had arranged to meet with Professor Malcolm McLeish, a distinguished mathematician who'd expressed interest in collaborating on a paper about epidemiological modeling. They met in a university lecture hall, its walls lined with chalkboards covered in complex equations. For 2 hours, they worked through calculations, challenged each other's assumptions, and built upon each other's insights. "You have a remarkable facility for seeing patterns others miss," Professor McLeish said as they concluded. "Have you considered pursuing formal advanced study? I could arrange for you to work as a research associate. It's irregular, certainly, but not without precedent for exceptional cases." Lillian felt possibility unfold like flowers in spring. "I would be honored, Professor." Walking home through Edinburgh's streets, passing the elegant crescents and bustling markets, Lillian reflected on how profoundly her life had transformed. A year earlier, she'd been a broken woman hiding in Lady Agatha's townhouse, convinced her life was ruined beyond recovery. Now she was a published researcher, an auditing student, a physician's wife engaged in meaningful work. The Duke's rejection, that moment of public devastation, had been, paradoxically, her liberation. Evening found the Thornfields at a dinner party hosted by Dr. James Fitzwilliam, one of Gabriel's colleagues at the teaching hospital. The gathering included physicians, professors and their spouses, intelligent, engaged people who conversed about reform movements and scientific advances rather than gossip and fashion. During dessert, conversation turned to news from London. Dr. Fitzwilliam's wife had received a letter from a friend describing recent scandals, including the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere's increasingly public marital discord. "Apparently they've been heard arguing at social events," Mrs. Fitzwilliam reported with relish. "The Duchess has taken to hosting rather wild salon parties that exclude the Duke. He's said to look positively haggard. Some suggest financial difficulties as well. His investments haven't performed as expected, and maintaining 2 extravagant personalities is reportedly quite expensive." Lillian felt Gabriel's eyes on her, silently questioning whether such discussion troubled her. She met his gaze and smiled slightly, shaking her head. The Duke's troubles stirred no satisfaction in her, but neither did they cause pain. That chapter was closed. "I also heard," Mrs. Fitzwilliam continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "that Lady Lillian Ashford, well, Mrs. Thornfield now, has been publishing in medical journals, creating quite a stir by all accounts. The first woman to have work appear in the Edinburgh Medical Review, can you imagine?" "Extraordinary," murmured several guests, unaware that the subject of their discussion sat among them. Lillian had chosen to attend the dinner using her professional byline rather than broadcasting her identity, and she felt a secret thrill at her work being recognized on its own merits. Gabriel, however, couldn't resist. "Gentlemen, ladies, I'm pleased to introduce you to L.A. Thornfield." He gestured to Lillian with obvious pride. "My wife and collaborator." The room erupted in surprised exclamations and enthusiastic questions. Lillian found herself drawn into animated discussion about her research, her methods, her future plans. No one dismissed her contributions because of her sex. These progressive Scots valued competence and innovation above arbitrary social restrictions. Later, as they walked home through Edinburgh's lamplit streets, Gabriel pulled Lillian close. "You were magnificent tonight. You're magnificent every day, actually. I don't tell you that nearly enough." "You tell me constantly," Lillian laughed. "I'm in danger of developing an inflated sense of my own importance." "Impossible. You're far too intelligent for baseless arrogance." Gabriel paused beneath a street lamp, turning her to face him. "Are you happy, Lillian? Truly happy? I know this life is nothing like what you were raised to expect. No grand estates, no social prominence, no leisure and luxury." Lillian cupped his face in her hands. "I have everything I never knew I wanted. Intellectual challenge, meaningful work, a partner who sees me, truly sees me. This life, our life, is worth 1,000 grand estates." "Even with the Edinburgh weather," Gabriel teased as rain began falling again. "Even with the weather," Lillian confirmed, laughing as they hurried toward home. 3 weeks later, Lillian received a letter from Lady Agatha. Her great-aunt wrote regularly, filling her correspondence with London gossip, political commentary, and acerbic observations about human nature. This particular letter, however, contained unexpected news. "Dearest Lillian, you'll be amused to learn that Charlotte has become engaged. Her intended is Mr. Thomas Whitmore. Yes, Professor Whitmore's younger son, the one studying law. He's terribly earnest and progressive, exactly the sort of young man who drives your mother to distraction. Charlotte apparently met him at one of my salons. She's become a regular attendee since your departure, and they bonded over shared interest in educational reform. Your sister has changed considerably these past months. Less superficial, more thoughtful. I believe your example, surviving catastrophe and emerging stronger, has given her permission to pursue substance over social standing. Your mother is predictably aghast, but your father seems quietly pleased. In other news, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere have separated. She's taken up with a Russian count of dubious provenance, and he's reportedly drinking heavily at his club. A cautionary tale about choosing passion over compatibility, I suppose. I feel no sympathy for either of them. Write soon and tell me of your latest research. I'm following your published work with enormous pride. You are precisely who I hoped you'd become, brilliant, independent, and utterly yourself." Your devoted great-aunt, Agatha Lillian, shared the letter with Gabriel that evening. He listened thoughtfully, then said, "Are you pleased about Charlotte? That she's found someone suitable?" "I am," Lillian realized, "truly pleased. She deserves happiness despite everything. We all do." "Even the Duke?" Gabriel asked, his tone carefully neutral. Lillian considered this. "Even the Duke, I suppose, though I suspect happiness will elude him. He's too focused on external validation, too imprisoned by his own arrogance. But I don't wish him active harm. Indifference is liberation, isn't it? Not caring enough to hate." Gabriel kissed her forehead. "You have the most extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and growth. It's one of countless reasons I love you." Summer arrived, transforming Edinburgh into a city of light and greenery. Lillian's research flourished. She'd been invited to co-author a major paper with Professor McLeish on mathematical modeling of cholera transmission. Gabriel's teaching hospital treated its 1,000th patient, a milestone they celebrated with the entire staff, and Lillian discovered, with mingled terror and joy, that she was expecting their first child. "A baby," Gabriel breathed, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Lillian, you've made me happier than I knew possible." "I'm frightened," Lillian admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous. I've read the statistics." "And you'll have the finest care Edinburgh can provide," Gabriel assured her. "Plus, you're strong and healthy. We'll face this together as we face everything." As autumn painted the city in rust and gold, Lillian stood once more at their townhouse window, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. 18 months earlier, she'd been Lady Lillian Ashford, a humiliated bride abandoned at the altar, convinced her life was irreparably ruined. Now she was Dr. Lillian Thornfield, not officially perhaps, but in all the ways that mattered. Published researcher, pioneering woman in medical mathematics, cherished wife, soon-to-be mother. She'd found her purpose, her voice, her true self. The Duke had called her insipid, a porcelain doll, bred like livestock for alliance. He'd meant to destroy her with those words. Instead, he'd freed her to discover that she was brilliant, resilient, and capable of far more than decorative usefulness. "Thank you," he whispered to her reflection, to the woman she'd become through trial and transformation. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for choosing to bloom where you were planted, even when the soil seemed barren." Gabriel joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting protectively over where their child grew. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. "That I'm grateful," Lillian said, "for everything. Even the painful parts, especially the painful parts, perhaps. They brought me here to this moment, to you." "I'm the grateful one," Gabriel replied. "You've transformed my life into something magical. Every single day with you is a gift." They stood together as twilight settled over Edinburgh, two people who'd found each other despite society's best efforts to keep them apart. In the distance, church bells rang, calling the faithful to evensong. Somewhere in London, the Duke and Duchess navigated their unhappy separation. Charlotte planned her wedding to a reformer's son. Lady Agatha held another salon filled with freethinkers and dreamers. And here, in this comfortable townhouse in Scotland's ancient capital, Lillian had discovered the most radical truth of all, that a woman could be ruined by society's standards and remade by her own, that public humiliation could become private liberation, that choosing one's own path, however unconventional, was the only true path to happiness. She'd been raised to be a duchess, ornamental, obedient, valued for lineage rather than merit. Instead, she'd become herself, complex, brilliant, flawed and free, and in that becoming, she'd found not just survival, but flourishing. The golden cage was gone forever. In its place, she'd built wings, and with them, she'd flown farther than any duchess's coronet could ever have carried her. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled.